This will truly be the golden age of America.
It was a complete tsunami, just a total electoral bloodbath.
It is populist versus establishment, and the establishment loses every time.
I know you're not supposed to say it, Piers, but we told you so.
You cannot tell me there's an establishment in the Republican Party. There simply isn't. There hasn't been for a very long time. I'll stop laughing. It's annoying.
I honestly urge liberals, wake the hell up.
This is a completely different election. We've entered into a different world right now.
He's the king. He's the king of marketing and branding.
Look, I believe Trump's an existential threat to our democracy.
It's like the Night of the Living Dead in California. They're just walking around going, brains.
Wow, what a night here in the United States. President Trump is back as president of the United States, and even his most embittered opponents are today reckoning with what is unequivocally the greatest comeback in political history. It now feels like a red mirage, but a few short years ago, it was the Republicans who wanted to turn the page. Governor Ron DeSantis was the great new hope. He was Trump without Trump's baggage, and the baggage just kept piling up. But after the failed succession, the legal barrage, the mugshot, the shock ousting of his opponent, and the 2 attempts on his life, this morning, the 45th president addressed the nation as the 47th president-elect.
And every citizen, I will fight for you, for your family, and your future. Every single day, I will be fighting for you, and with every breath in my body, I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe, and prosperous America that our children deserve and that you deserve. This will truly be the golden age of America.
More than ever before, voters chose between two starkly different visions for America after being presented with what felt like two very different versions of reality. Well, they've chosen emphatically. Trump is on course to win the presidency, the Senate, possibly the House of Representatives, and even the popular vote, the first Republican to do that, if he does, since George W. Bush in 2004. He single-handedly knocked U.S. politics from its axis. America has defied the mantra that demography is destiny, and the Democrats have serious lessons to learn from this dismal failure. So far, they're in denial.
Let's be honest about this, okay? Let's be absolutely blunt about it. There were appeals to racism in this campaign, and there is racial bias in this country, and there is sexism in this country, and anybody who thinks that that did not in any way impact on the outcome of this race is wrong.
Funny that, because I seem to remember it was Barack Obama who told black Americans they should vote for the black candidate because of her skin color. What's that if that's not a form of racism? Well, the reality is that Trump made huge inroads with black voters and wasn't deserted by women. He's built an anti-establishment coalition with the voters now fleeing the Democrats, Latinos, the Rust Belt hardhats, the Joe Rogan bros. The last Democrat leader who commanded the affection of all those groups was Bernie Sanders. We all remember what the DNC machine did to him. That's not a key point here. As much as this is Trump's amazing victory, it is also the Democrats' defeat to own. The gaslighting industrial complex that told us Joe Biden was razor sharp and infallible until that debate when the whole world could see he was senile and they decided he couldn't win. Then they told us that Kamala Harris was joy and hope personified, even as the polls told us she was the least popular vice president in living memory. They kept telling us Trump was Hitler. His supporters were garbage as he campaigned for a strong border and a strong economy while gleefully slinging fries at McDonald's or driving a garbage truck. They relied on celebrities and the legacy media, even as every metric showed us that nobody cares anymore what they all have to say. Trump's first victory changed the United States and changed the world. Well, buckle up, because today, this even bigger victory will change everything. Well, joining me now is the co-host of Breaking Point's Crystal Ball, host and founder of the Young Turks, Cenk Uygur, Vincent Ashana from the PBD podcast, and Republican Texas Congressman and former Navy SEAL, Dan Crenshaw. Well, welcome to all of you. Crystal Ball, I had you on the show recently, and you declared that Kamala Harris would win all 7 swing states. It would seem your crystal ball, if you don't mind me saying this, is a little cracked because Trump is currently won 4 of the 7 and leading in the other 3. Your response?
Yeah, no doubt about it. What I got wrong in this election is that I thought, even though I've been critiquing the Democratic Party, certainly since the Bernie Sanders movement, I thought that January 6th and the overturning of Roe versus Wade and Trump's manifestly authoritarian tendencies, as evidenced by the people who were closest with him in the White House, I thought it would be enough to overcome those problems on the Democratic side. And I was absolutely dead wrong. So a couple of problems specifically with Kamala's campaign. I think there was way too much spending time with Liz Cheney, spending time with Mark Cuban, way too little time spending time with Bernie Sanders, spending time with Sean Fain, who's the president of the UAW. And in general, Piers, something I agreed with from your intro is the last guy who did the best with the coalition that is fleeing the Democratic Party right now is Bernie Sanders. And Democrats did everything they possibly could to block him from not only ascending to, be the Democratic nominee, but to block him from having any significant influence in the party. He offered a competing vision that could actually combat the fascism that you see with Donald Trump. Just talking about fascism, talking about how bad Donald Trump is clearly not enough to get the job done. And so we have the results that we have.
Yeah, I mean, Dan Crenshaw, I spoke to President Trump this morning, just rang him on his phone, and to my surprise, he picked up. And I think even he was a bit taken aback by the sheer scale of this victory. I mean, it's not now beyond the realms of fantasy that he could win the White House, the Republicans win the Senate, they win the House of Representatives, and he may end up winning the popular vote as well as Electoral College. An absolute clean sweep. And you can only conclude from that this is an utter repudiation of all the attack lines that his opponents have been trying on him for the past year. And I would include in that the weaponization of the legal system against Trump, the attempts to take his life from 2 assassination attempts and so on. You put it all together, and this is a gigantic 2 fingers from the American electorate to those who said Trump can't be president again.
Yeah, it really is. It surprised a lot of us. Look, if you've been asking me for predictions for a while now, and I've said every single time, if you make me make a prediction, I'm going to say it's a clean sweep, but it's close. And turns out, I was right, but I was also wrong. I mean, I didn't think he was going to win every swing state, and now he's looking like he's going to win every swing state. Looks like we're probably going to have a majority of about 7 in the House. A small improvement over 4. The Senate's looking way better than we thought it was going to look. I'm actually I'm so frustrated with ourselves because we should have 2 Republican seats in Arizona. We should have 2 Republican seats in Georgia. That would put us at 60 votes. We would have a real majority for the first time in, maybe ever. It really is something. And just responding to what Crystal said, I just think it's funny because my greatest fear as a Republican is that when we lose, we learn the wrong lessons. And the wrong lessons as a Republican, speaking just as a Republican, she can have her opinions as a Democrat, but my fears have always been that when we lose, we all get together, we do an internal firing squad, and we say it's because we weren't right-wing enough, and we alienated our rightest of the right voters. That is the wrong message. Because the way we won this time and the way we keep majorities in the House, it's those majority makers, it's those moderates, Trump won women and white women in this election. He did massive improvements in the Latino and black voters. You don't do that by running to the right. You do that by constantly hitting the same message about the economy and immigration and just this common sense stuff that people are really worried about. And so, look, don't get me wrong, I kind of hope Democrats learn the wrong lessons here because I'd like to keep winning. But I'd be curious for her to unpack that a little bit more because it doesn't make sense to me. When Democrats were crushing it, really quick, when Democrats were crushing Republicans was in the 90s. That was in the 90s, and they were a very different party back then. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, well, the world was very different, and neoliberalism was absolutely ascendant there then. Now we're in a post-neoliberal world. And so what I'm not talking about a shift to the left. I'm talking about a shift top versus bottom. Trump has his version of fake populism. He's got his villains. He's got his scapegoats, immigrants, cultural elites. Bernie Sanders, when he ran in the Occupy movement, when they were ascendant, talked about the 1%, talked about the millionaires and billionaires, talked about corporate greed, talked about unfettered capitalism. That's the shift that I'm talking about. And we know that it was effective because that Bernie to Trump pipeline, that was real. people who were voting for Bernie Sanders, who were Latinos, who were working class, who were Joe Rogan bros, who were Joe Rogan himself, have now, when faced with the choice between Trumpism and neoliberalism, chosen Trumpism. When faced with the choice between Trumpism and Bernie Sanders left populism, chose left populism every time.
Okay, let me bring in Cenk, because Cenk, I'm going to be honest with you.
I get that analysis. I get that analysis a little bit better, yeah.
Yeah, Cenk, I woke up this morning and I actually thought of you. I felt sorry for you because I thought, how on earth are you going to come on my show now, given the sheer scale of this devastating victory and devastating defeat for the Democrats? I mean, it is hard to imagine a worse morning to be Cenk Uygur. So, how are you?
I'm great. I come on your show with the same swagger I always do. So the reality, Piers, is unfortunately I was right all along. I told you that Joe Biden was feeble and ridiculous, and I told you they should have done a real convention and a real primary, and they didn't do it. They should have picked their strongest candidate. Now, look, Crystal's 100% right, and I need everybody to understand this is the most important fact about politics today in America. It is not left versus right. That is an old way of thinking. It is populist versus establishment. And the establishment loses every time now. And the reason that they can't see it is because everyone on TV, everyone in the Democratic leadership is the establishment. So they can't look at themselves in the mirror and go, oh, it turns out people hate me. They need to go in a populist direction. It is super obvious. They'll probably never see it. Next time around, the main thing is, we've got to reach the Democratic voters, go around mainstream media who lie to them 24/7. Right now, this morning, they're doing copium on MSNBC, talking about how white women ruined this for them or different demographic groups didn't show up. It's absurd. It's absurd. You lost because you're a bunch of elitists and you don't even realize it.
But I would also say, Cenk, and I'm sorry to single you out, but you are the person here who's done a lot of this on my show. I do think the constant over-demonization of Trump, when people were calling him a fascist, a neo-Nazi, the new Hitler, all this, I kept warning people on the left, this is going to backfire. Most average Americans do not think Trump is the new Hitler. They did not see in his first term of office a fascist at work. Yes, they thought January 6th was awful. We all did. And it should never have happened. And that's more playing, to be honest with you, to Trump's refusal to ever accept losing. You know, I just watched the movie about him that came out, and it's crystal clear. This has always been in his DNA. Never accept defeat. And that was a consequence of that mindset. But he wasn't a fascist in his first term. Yes, he says stuff he shoots from the hip verbally all the time. And he says stuff which sometimes sounds awful. But he didn't actually behave like a fascist. And so when you tell the American people constantly, rather than telling us what Kamala Harris might do with the country, which she was completely incapable of articulating, by the way, and ducked the press, didn't do press conferences, blah, blah, blah. But when you constantly try and frame Trump, you know, I was at the Madison Square Garden rally, first one I'd been to. That was not a Nazi rally. It had a load of Jewish people sitting in the crowd. It had Israel banners all around the sides. It had a Holocaust survivor at the front. So when you try and frame it, as some on the left did, as a neo-Nazi rally and go back as MSNBC did, to a rally in 1939 in Madison Square Garden that was a neo-Nazi rally, you are losing the plot. It is not the way to beat Trump. It is the way to fuel Trump and to get him to be more popular. Do you now think I was right?
So you have to draw an important distinction here. In fact, two distinctions. So first of all, not only did I never call him a neo-Nazi or Hitler, I called him fascist, and there is a giant difference. But last night, Representative Steve Cohen from Tennessee was on the Young Turks as we were doing election coverage, and he called him Hitler. And I said, don't do that, because Hitler killed 13 million people. We're not anywhere near there. I mean, this morning, Joy Reid's talking about how Florida's a fascist state. What are you talking about? I'm going to go into Miami a little bit later in this week. It's ridiculous. But in terms of why I call him a fascist and why I think it's right, Piers, is because he tried to overturn the election in 2020, and he did fake elector plot. He planned a coup, etc. And that's what fascists do. But it doesn't matter, because he won this election fair and square. So we're back to democracy. I'm happy to just say clean slate. Let's see what he does. But I think, unfortunately, I'm going to be proven right about him as well. Because, yes, he's a much better fake populist, and the Democrats still don't get it. They're bragging about how they raised $1 billion and how all the corporate CEOs are on their side and all the Cheneys are on their side. That is the worst strategy you could possibly imagine. It's not that Trump won this nearly as much as the Democrats lost this election. They don't get it. Stop bragging about how CEOs love you and how you raised $1 billion, and that is corruption defined. Now, when it comes to Trump, look, guys, let's all hope that I'm wrong, but my guess is you're all going to be deeply disappointed. He's going to rob the place blind. Elon's going to rob the place blind. They're not real populists. They're going to give corporate tax cuts. They're going to do all the things that Democrats do. They're just going to be more clever about it. Their number one priority is going to be giant corporate tax cuts and corporate deregulation. So if I'm right about it, you guys will see he was never a populist. He was only looking out for himself.
All right, Vinny, you must be absolutely thrilled today because everything you've hoped for. This is like Thanksgiving and Christmas just came a little early, right?
Piers, good morning. You know, Piers, it's always good when your guy wins, and I mean, you spoke with Donald Trump today. I know he's your friend, and it feels good. I know you're not supposed to say it, Piers, but we told you so, okay? And you guys were talking about this, Hillary. Like, think about what the left did. You diminished the weight behind the name Hitler, okay? So now this morning, everybody on the left is like, oh my God, Hitler won, and the Nazis are celebrating, all right? But Piers, people like Cenk and all these left, MSNBC, all the hags from freaking The View, they should be calling Trump and thanking him and celebrating. So at least they're going to have something to talk about for the next 4 years, okay? Because these people have no substance. It's just Trump is the bad man. Watch us, listen to us. And I think it's a great day for America, Piers. And I just, he said last night, and I wrote this down, that God spared his life for a reason, and that's to save the country. Because let's not forget really quick, Piers, how we got here, okay? Trump was supposed to be dead. That assassin's bullet, Piers, and whoever that sniper assassin was going right for his head, okay? Because as we know, when it comes to assassins, Piers, they want to put out a freaking message. When they shot JFK, they shot him in his throat, and then they shot him in his head. That sends a message to the world, don't mess with us. We're the deep state, we're the establishment, you don't do that. God spared his life, Piers. If he was dead, Biden would still be in right now. That walking zombie would still be the president. He would win by a landslide, and they'd probably use the 25th Amendment to get him out to have Kamala. She had no business being here. I actually feel bad for her, Piers. She had 7 days to try to sell the world on her being the savior. It didn't work. God bless America, Piers, and thank God for Donald Trump. And I'm ecstatic, Piers. I'm besides myself. It's amazing.
I mean, Crystal, talking to Kamala Harris, I do think it's pretty extraordinary she hasn't conceded yet. I mean, to be fair to Hillary Clinton, she did concede, in the early hours in 2016. Kamala Harris has had one of the biggest drubbings in modern political history anywhere and still hasn't conceded. We're told she may make an address conceding at 6 o'clock tonight, Eastern time, which seems to me way too late. Why is she not? I mean, given all the fury from Democrats about Trump never conceding the election last time, surely the right thing to do would be for her to concede immediately, wouldn't it?
I mean, sure. We know she's going to concede. No one is seriously considering she's going to, as vice president, not do the electoral certification, et cetera. So I have no doubt she's going to concede. Democrats are going to say it was free and fair, and they're all going to move forward. I just want to say one thing to Vinny in response to this conversation about fascism, Hitler, et cetera. I think liberals are largely right about the threat that Trump represents. I think they're largely right when they describe his ideology accurately as fascism. And I think it's important we also remember where that conversation
but the American
about
people don't agree
Trump's
with you.
comments.
Yeah, Crystal, the problem is.
Hold on, let me just say.
I would really urge. I would really urge. Hang on, Vinny. I would really urge liberals. Look, I am a liberal. All right, I know Cenk never believes me, but I am. All right, I know Trump personally. I've known him a long time, but I'm not a natural conservative. Never have been. When I go on the 5 on Fox, they put me in the liberal chair. I joked with Harold about it the other day. They put me in his seat, right? So there's a reason they do that. I used to run a newspaper in Britain, which was lent to the left. So I really am. I'm more of a Bill Maher kind of guy when it comes to my politics. But I honestly urge liberals, wake the hell up. If you keep
But here's
calling
the
him
thing,
a
Piers,
fascist,
I'm not
if you keep calling
arguing
him a
about
fascist
how
when
to
he's
affect-
won the popular vote, you're basically calling
but here's-
the majority of.
but
Hang
here's
on.
the thing.
Hang
How
on.
are you
Hang on. Let me
supposed to
finish.
describe-
Let me finish my
How are you
point.
supposed to
You're
describe
hang
an
on,
authoritarian
Crystal.
right-wing
Crystal,
ideology? It's
let me
fascism.
finish my point. Let me finish my point, which is this.
You guys
which
cut
is,
me off, and
if
then
you-
I don't get to finish.
If he wins the popular vote, as well as everything else, what you're doing when
Yeah.
you continue to call him a fascist, you're basically saying that all these Americans who voted for him are supporting a fascist and are therefore themselves fascists. Do
Okay.
you not get that?
But let's make a distinction here. I'm talking about accurately describing reality, a reality that was described by not liberals, by his chief of staff, John Kelly, a lifelong Republican, by Mike Mattis, right? By, ask Mike Pence how he feels about Donald Trump and his authoritarian tendencies in office. That's different. Accurately describing reality, which I think we all have an obligation to do, is different from arguing about how I think they should most effectively go about defeating that fascist ideology as embodied by Donald Trump. And on that, I agree with you. I think they go about it all the wrong ways by not offering an alternative vision that accurately identifies the problems in American society as unfettered capitalism, corporate greed, et cetera. So, in terms of the electoral piece, I think you're correct. But, just looking at the definition of fascism, looking at the people who served with him, who know him way better than I do, who say, yeah, I think that he fits the definition. I can't lie and not accurately describe reality because that would be dishonest to my audience.
Let me come to Dan. I want to come to Dan. I want to play, first of all, this is a little mashup of how Liberals responded as the news became clear last night.
The Fox News decision desk can now officially project that Donald Trump will become the 47th president of the United States.
You know that old saying about how insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result?
I got it totally wrong. I thought Kamala Harris would win, and I believe she would win comfortably. I thought it would be over quite quickly.
You said, I guarantee Donald Trump will never be president again. Yeah, right. You're wrong.
Well, I got wrong. It's competition for sure.
They're still outstanding. Why isn't Philadelphia counting votes? I want to know what is going on. What the hell is going on right now?
I'm gonna cry tears, dude. I'm gonna cry the most tears. You're gonna own me so hard, dude.
It shouldn't be easier to beat a black woman, or maybe it should.
He hasn't faced a whole slew of other charges, and yet, with all of that, he is going back to the White House.
It's not the elite that's going to pay the price. It's people who woke up this morning with a dream and are going to bed with a nightmare.
Dan, amusing though it will be to a lot of conservatives to watch all those liberal tears and all their dreams dying before our eyes. The challenge for Donald Trump now, I was very encouraged actually.
It's even on my mug right now, Piers.
But the challenge for Trump, and I was very encouraged actually by his speech. In fact, let me just play a little bit of his speech when he came out last night, when he knew he'd won. Then I'll come to you for your response.
It was so normal and humble.
Let me just play the clip, Dan, and then I'll come to you.
Perfect.
Hang on a sec.
Built the biggest, the broadest, the most unified coalition. They've never seen anything like it in all of American history. They've never seen it. Young and old, men and women, rural and urban. They came from all corners, union, non-union, African American, Hispanic American, Asian American, Arab American, Muslim American. A historic realignment, uniting citizens of all backgrounds around a common core of common sense. You know, we're the party of common sense.
Dan, I thought that was a really good phrase, that, the core of common sense, and the realignment, where he cited all these different ethnic groups in America who come together to basically sign up to Trump's worldview. And I do think, and liberals have not wanted to concede this point, but I've begun to detect a change in mood today, that when they try to downplay things like, for example, transgender athletes in women's sport and the very damaging impact that is having, I really think they underestimated how the majority of Americans feel about that kind of thing. That they just see it as completely unfair and an erosion of women's rights. And it's coming from a party, because Kamala Harris and Joe Biden both supported it, it comes from a party who tries to portray themselves as the only party that cares about women's rights. So I think this core of common sense message that Trump had was really significant in why he won. But also, he's got a chance, and he talked in quite a unified way last night. He's got a chance to try and bring the country together. Do you think he'll take that chance?
That's a great question. There's a lot to unpack. There was a lot said in the last few minutes, and I didn't get to hit any of it. And I actually think this conversation, first of all, about left-wing populism and right-wing populism and what populism even means, I think is really interesting. I hope we keep hitting on that. It was said before, he's a fake populist. Well, I hope so, because populism is crap. I mean, populism is the art of telling you what you want to hear instead of the truth. That is populism. Yeah, I mean, of course. Look, I don't need to
Dan
hide
is
it.
the
I
least
talk about
happy
how
in
bad
this
populism
panel.
is all the time. The least what?
Dan is establishment. Dan is establishment Republican. He hates the Trump
Whatever that
one.
means.
So he wanted to start more wars. So he's the least happy on this entire
more
panel.
war, yeah.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
I'm feeling. It's funny because I'm feeling pretty happy right now because.
Cenk, no one can be more
Trump didn't
unhappy
start
than
any
you,
wars.
surely. Come on.
Yeah, and like I've never started any wars. I'm actually the only one here who actually bothers fighting in them. So don't talk to me about war. And look, populism is just lying. Populism is just lying. Liberals just lie to people. They bribe them with their votes. That was the Kamala Harris campaign slogan. We're going to give you $25,000 if you buy a new house. We're going to forgive your student loan debts. We're going to double the child tax credit, which was a Republican idea, by the way. Like, we're just going to bribe you if you just vote for me. And you know what? Nothing in your life is your fault. It's always somebody else's fault. You're the victim because of your skin color or gender. You're the victim. And people are so tired of hearing that. I speak to a lot of high schools. And when I bring up wokeism, when I bring up this victimhood ideology, that's actually what riles these kids up, which makes me really happy. It shows me that we're on a good track in America. They are sick of hearing this kind of stuff. That's what populism is. Now, maybe you have a different definition of it. You say it's against the elites, it's against the establishment. We need to be very clear about something. The Democrat Party does indeed have an establishment. You are correct about that. Nancy Pelosi orchestrated the downfall of Biden. That establishment orchestrated the insertion of Kamala Harris without any vote whatsoever. That's all true. But you cannot tell me there's an establishment in the Republican Party. There simply isn't. There hasn't been for a very long time. I'll do a quick thought experiment and prove it. Well, I'll do a quick thought experiment and prove it to you. Stop laughing. It's annoying. So here's the thought experiment. I'm running in my primary.
You're it. Look in the mirror.
I can do one of two things. I can say I'm bucking the establishment or I'm for the establishment. Which one is going to get me more votes? Obviously, bucking the establishment gets me more votes. So that negates the existence of any establishment. When 4% of our conference could take down our Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, we don't have an establishment. We don't have that unifying establishment. We never have. Like, what's the address for this establishment? How are they funded? Who are they? Who are these dark, murky people running things and using their little puppet strings to control everybody? It's not true. It's not true. And so the populism is a left-wing ideology that has infected some of the right. And yes, Donald Trump is going to do things that are pro-growth because populist tendencies tend to be anti-growth. They tend to be anti-free market, and that's bad for your children and your children's children. So let's on that real quick. And I already forgot what Pierce's question actually was. Oh,
it was really about. I'll tell you what it was, Dan. It was about unity and whether Trump has it in him to unify the country. Given how divisive he is, but notwithstanding that, how big the win is, he's got a chance.
Well, I'm hopeful on that for a few reasons. One, right? Trump has had this chip on his shoulder for years after the 2020 election. And you know, we all know what that's about. But he's no longer running for re-election, and he had a really clean sweep. That matters a lot to the man's psyche. Another thing, he cares about his legacy. Now he doesn't have to worry about re-election. He cares more than anything else about legacy. And for him, that means America is the best at every metric that you can imagine. So, look, guys, we have 4 years of Trump already. He didn't govern as a fascist. And I'd love to hear what your definition of fascism is. I mean, is it packing the Supreme Court? Is it doing away with the filibuster? So, by the way, are Democrats still in favor of those things? Are Democrats still now in favor of doing away with the filibuster and packing the Supreme Court? I'm just curious. Or are those now are those now not part of the Democrat platform? Because those
All
are
right, but let me bring
fascistic
in-
tendencies as well, this
Let me bring,
authoritarian tendencies.
Okay, let me bring Cenk in. I mean, Cenk, look, the problem is, whatever you say this morning, to be honest, and I say this respectfully, is all just going to sound pretty hollow, because the truth is, the Democrats have taken just a gigantic drubbing. I mean, it's on a scale so big, it's humiliating. So almost everything that your side has been saying for the last year has just gone up in smoke. No one was buying into it.
But
no one was buying into anything Kamala Harris had to say about anything, it looks like. She actually did worse than Biden almost everywhere. I mean, that's quite an achievement. So what do the Democrats do coming out of the wreckage of this?
Yeah. So I don't know how many times I got to tell you this, Piers. I don't like Democratic leadership. I think they are grossly incompetent. I loathe them. Okay, look, they call Donald Trump a maniacal clown, and I agree with that. But they lost to him twice. So what does that make them? Utter losers. And they're all over TV now blaming the voters, blaming this, blaming that. That's not why they lost. They lost because the Democratic Party leadership is a bunch of elitist clowns who agree with Dan Crenshaw. They think, oh, there's no establishment. You guys are making it up. So, Dan, I'll tell you who
Why
the
are they
establishment is.
attacking me all the time? Why do they hate my guts? I'm their worst enemy.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's so easy for me to beat them.
Okay.
It's so easy for me to beat Democrats.
So let me explain.
I'm one of the best at it.
Yeah. You guys actually totally agree, and you will agree on corporate tax cuts in within days of Donald Trump winning. So,
What
guys,
Democrat
he said there is no
agrees on
Republican
corporate tax cuts?
Can I just finish the point? Okay. So, who's the
That's
establishment
not true.
Republicans?
No Democrat agrees on that.
Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell's an establishment Republican. Almost all the Republican senators are establishment Republicans. And by the way, Nancy
Define what
Pelosi is
that
an establishment Democrat. Joe Biden is. What it means is you take donor money and you serve donors. You guys are all crooks. So you notice what Dan said? He said, oh, we're going to do I think Trump is smart enough to do pro-growth. You know what that means? It means tax cuts for the rich that are all Dan's donors. And they were Kamala Harris's donors.
When you say
It's not a left-right issue.
Cenk, when you say
Can
you're
I
all
put
crooks,
some economic
hang on, Dan.
Yeah,
Hang
you're
on,
going to
Dan.
do
Hang on,
corporate
Dan.
tax cuts, aren't
So we
you?
understand.
You're going to do corporate tax cuts, aren't you?
No, let me
You're
just
going
say
to do corporate
something.
tax cuts, aren't you?
Cenk, when you
I
say
want Dan
you
on the
guys,
record. I want Dan on the record.
hang on, Cenk, when you say Cenk,
There should be
you
corporate
guys are all.
taxes. I told
Hang
you.
on.
I
Let me
told you.
speak. Let me speak. When you
Rich
say you guys are
establishment,
Good economic
Cenk,
sense.
I understand, Cenk, that the mood inside your body might be running hot this morning. However,
No,
let me
it's
just point out
not. You're
something.
not getting it.
When
My
you shout,
enemies,
you
the
guys are all
loser,
when you-
idiot Democratic
Cenk,
establishment lost.
I get it, but when you say you guys are all crooks, and you got someone like Dan sitting there,
what does that
it's a
mean?
ridiculous thing to say. Why do you use that language?
It's not.
It is ridiculous.
It's not. Piers, then you don't understand politics at all.
So wait, so Bernie,
all of the
Bernie
donor
Sanders
money,
isn't.
You said I
all
don't
the
understand
donor
politics,
money
but I was
goes
the
to
one who called
crooks.
Trump winning big
Goes
the
to
entire
crooks
time.
like Dan
You
Crenshaw.
didn't.
So let me ask
Yeah,
you something.
but-
Let's ask
So
Vinny.
Bernie Sanders
Vinny,
isn't a
Vinny,
multimillionaire who takes donor money?
Yeah. Okay, Vinny. Do you think that the donor money is? Do you agree with Dan? Do you think Dan? Do you agree with Dan that the donor money is irrelevant? They don't serve the donors at all. There are no establishment Republicans. We're all making it up. And golly gee, even Trump shouldn't have gone in a populist direction. And this is all wrong. And they should just serve the donors. And we're all imagining it. Vinny, you're on the right. What do you think?
Nobody's serving donors.
I agree.
Our incentive structures are not. I think your incentive structures.
Hey, it's not your turn, Dan. Let Vinny
are totally
talk.
different than mine.
Yeah, hold on, just real quick. And then just to clarify.
I can't see anybody. How are we supposed to know?
Well, Dan, just to clarify, I am a United States Air Force veteran as well, so I didn't serve in combat, but I am a veteran, so my brother, my sister, but that's besides the point. And I do agree with Cenk. You cannot say that there's no establishment. There's establishment left and there's establishment right. And for all these people taking donor money, you are the establishment. Donald Trump is a beast because he didn't need anybody's money. And to go back to Kristen's point, when she mentions Mattis and Kelly.
Are you guys high right now?
No, I'm actually very sober.
Like, he's taken a ton of donor money. He's taken a ton of donor money. Every single one does, including your favorite Bernie Sanders, including Donald Trump. You guys can't just make up facts
not
right
corporate
now.
money like you.
And then do single variable analysis about.
That's a fact.
And you can't just do single variable
He literally
analysis
doesn't take corporate PAC
about
money.
donor money equals corruption.
All right, let me look. I think we're getting in.
Can I actually?
Let me bring in. Hang on. Let me bring in Crystal. I want to ask you this, Crystal. Kamala Harris made a big play of abortion rights. She really bet the bank on that delivering enough women to get her over the line. And there was this weird poll, the Seltzer poll that came out of Iowa at the weekend that really excited everyone, where she had, the normally very accurate pollster, she had Kamala up 3 in Iowa, and it was apparently women over 60 that were driving that. And the general feeling then was, wow, maybe older women in particular, who might be old enough to remember life before Roe versus Wade, may come out and punish Trump enough where they win. But they simply didn't come out in anything like the numbers people expected. And you also had at the same time, obviously, a lot of black men and Latino men going to Trump and so on. But the women just did not come out for Kamala Harris. Why? And was it that abortion in the end, yes, it's an important issue, of course it is, but not as important to the average American who can't afford to put food on the table and is incensed by the fact that at the same time of this cost of living crisis, you have nearly 10 million illegal immigrants coming over the border, which is putting huge pressure on public services. Was it they just bet the bank on the wrong issue? That actually, yeah, it's important, but not as important as I kept saying. I think it's the economy, and immigration. They're the 2 reasons that Trump is so popular.
I think that I and others overlearned the lesson from 2022, because in 2022, I was saying, oh, look at the economic numbers. Voters are saying economy, inflation, these are number one issues. The economic numbers, by the way, were far worse at that point. And I said, it's a wrap, like it's going to be a massive red wave. And then that red wave didn't materialize. So I took from that this issue, which had really been a game changer in terms of the American public in a way that, frankly, I did not anticipate before. But I think part of what is different in 2024 is, number one, it's, much larger general election electorate. So that's a big change. And number two, as much as I think there are failures on the Democratic part, I also think we can't deny that Trump is this uniquely charismatic performer. And people love the show. So he outperformed every Republican on the ticket, which is also a rebuke to, a lot of Republicans who thought that they had to get rid of him because of all of his baggage. I actually think he's the most, likely to win of the Republican set. I think Ron DeSantis would have been in much more difficult terrain. So every single Republican Senate candidate underperforms him, save for, I believe, 1. So I think that's part of why. But, look, the country overwhelmingly says that we're on the wrong track. They're very dissatisfied with the economy. Joe Biden's approval rating is very low. Those are very favorable conditions for a challenger to come in and win. And so when voters say at the end of the day, economy and inflation, those are my number one issues, I believe them when they say that.
Okay, Vinny, what do you want to see Trump do in his second term? I totally agree with what Dan said, that he'll be much more conscious of his legacy because he hasn't got to win another election. So he's got a second chance that maybe even Trump, if he's honest, thought at the start of 2022 he might not have got. I thought he was dead and buried politically. I think most people did. So the fact he's won again so emphatically is extraordinary, but it gives him an extraordinary opportunity to correct the legacy that he left with last time. What do you want to see him do, and how important is it to unify America? It's so bitter, it's so divisive, American political discourse now. Would you like to see him bring people into the tent? For example, putting some people perhaps in his cabinet from the other side, bringing people in, being a genuine unifier.
Yeah, and Piers, he was already doing it. If you watch the campaign trail, he not only had Jewish Americans backing him, in Detroit, he had Muslims going on stage and saying that he has the Muslim vote again. And I do think, Piers, and just going back, Piers, the Democrats had 4 years, Piers, 4 years to prove everybody wrong and say, look at how bad Trump was. Look at what we've done. They did absolutely nothing. They got exposed and they did shit. Sorry for my language, Piers, but this is what I want him to do besides being a unifier, because I wrote some of these things down. We need election reform. Number one, Piers, the fact that California, Gavin Newsom, has made it illegal to even show your ID to vote speaks volumes on what these people want. Flying illegals to all these swing states is unbelievable. And all these battleground states, that's cheating. He has to do that, number one, too. I want him to get all the Epstein's list, and this is not unifying, but this needs retribution. We need exposure to all these people. Epstein's list and holding all these people accountable for what they did. January 6th, we need a full investigation. I know, excuse me. Yeah, okay, listen. Get rid of that bullshit.
His best friend for 10 years.
Okay.
I'm sure that list is really forthcoming.
By the way, switch everything on Donald Trump. Not Bill Clinton or any of your go-to Democrats. But anyway, let me finish.
I called them
January 6th.
Donald
January
Trump was
6th.
his
Let me
best friend
finish.
for 10 years. So conveniently ignore that.
Okay. Yeah, they were best friends. Yeah. The January 6th investigation, the pipe bomb investigation, Piers, I think he needs to pardon all the people that didn't do anything wrong, that were just standing there. They got freaking 20 years in prison. Oh my God. Yeah, it was an insurrection. No guns, no nothing. Nobody got killed. The only person that got killed.
The trouble, Vinny, the trouble is,
I think it's so funny though.
Well, hang on. I tell you what.
It starts with like, oh, we're going to be unified, and then it's like, here's who I want.
Well, that's the point I was going to make, Vinny.
Because she wants us to forget.
No, but it's
because you want us to forget.
Classic.
You want us to forget. No. It's classic because you guess what? You got to go on accountability. You don't want accountability. No. Let me finish. You don't want accountability, and that's what you Democrats do. Yeah,
hold on,
accountability for all the
bullshit.
bullshit.
This doesn't sound very unifying now. Let me just hang on, please. Hang on, just time out, please. I want time out. I want to bring in Frank Luntz, who's obviously one of America's top pollsters. Frank, we've talked a lot in this presidential race. It's been incredibly unpredictable. We've seen assassination attempts. We've seen the usurping of the Democrat nominee. We've seen Trump convicted of a crime and then ending up back at the White House. It's really extraordinary. I want to play a clip of you. The last time we spoke was just after the debate where Kamala won that debate, and you said this.
I think more accurately it's that Donald Trump lost. And this is not the worst debate performance I've seen in my career, but it's very close to it. The conversations about people eating dogs and cats, calling the leader of Hungary one of the greatest world leaders, repeatedly missing the opportunity to focus on inflation and affordability, and the complete inability to present his point of view without completely tearing into her, into Joe Biden, into whomever was in his sights. It was a pretty negative performance, pretty pessimistic, cynical, contemptuous, and I think that this will cost him. Yes, I'm trying to decide if I want to go on record, and the answer is yes. I think that he loses because of this debate performance.
Wow. Now, Frank, that was September the 11th, and you kind of almost forced yourself into finally coming out in the way you did, and it didn't look to me like you were completely certain, but your gut was telling you that. My own gut throughout this whole last few months has been very much that I thought Trump was going to win. It would just be a question of how big. Most pollsters had it like a knife edge, and yet it looks like in the end Trump may win everything. Did the pollsters get it wrong? Is there a unique aspect to Trump where it just doesn't get picked up, his popularity, in the same way that normal candidates do? What do you think's happened here?
Well, I appreciate your willingness to let me out of it, but you shouldn't. I got it wrong. I thought that debates mattered. I thought that the one time when you put both candidates right next to each other and get them to talk for 90 minutes, that the public would make a decision. And not that she did well, but he did horribly. And I thought that was it for him. And I now realize that for some candidates, debates don't matter. For some candidates, decorum doesn't matter. For some candidates, civility doesn't matter, because for half of America, they don't believe in decorum. They don't believe in civility. They're mad as hell. They're not going to take it anymore. And they just want to be heard, because up until now, they've been ignored, forgotten, or even betrayed. So don't let me out of that. Hold me accountable for it. And I wish that other pollsters would do the same. The worst survey of all was this Iowa survey that had Harris up by 3, and then she ends up losing that state by what, 10 points? I mean, it was just wrong. And that changed the entire narrative. And I want to respond in a slightly broader way, because I watched how some of the places that I appear on really focused on what happened at that Madison Square Garden rally when the comedian said that thing that was just horrible. I've worked in Puerto Rico before. It's a wonderful place. It's got its challenges, but the people are awesome. And how Trump just let that happen. And yet, the president, Joe Biden, said something horrific about Trump supporters, and they try to dismiss it. They try to cover up for it. They try to move away from it. This is a completely different election. We've entered into a different world right now, driven by social media, driven by failure in education, and driven by people who feel left behind by economic success. And the thing, Piers, that I would really emphasize is there are people struggling right now. They can't afford their food. They can't afford their rent or their mortgage payment. They have trouble with health care. They have trouble with housing. And Trump speaks to them. And he speaks in a way that they hear him. I don't like the way he talks, but they do. And you know what? I have to accept that because it's not about me or you. It's not about any of us yelling on this panel. It really is about them and what they want. And I just hope as we look forward that we find some way to restore a sense of respect for each other, that we embrace different points of view. We can argue about it and we can disagree, but that at least we respect each other. And I'm hopeful but nervous that this is the new normal and we're never going to get back to that sense of understanding and appreciation for those who disagree.
Frank, when you see the results as they're streaming in, what are the biggest surprise takeaways for you? What are the things you just weren't anticipating?
I questioned, and I was questioning my own numbers. So people were asking me who's going to win, and I kept saying I can't call it. And they would say to me, "You're gutless. Do it. We trust you." I couldn't because I didn't believe my work. I didn't believe their work. And in the end, probably the biggest surprise is the Latino vote, the Hispanic vote, that Trump actually won Latino men. It wasn't close. He actually won them. And then he got well over 40% of that vote. I knew they were moving. I knew they were trending. And that represents a realignment because he was overt about immigration. He was overt about how he felt in regards to the border. And not only did they not jam him for that, they endorsed him for this. And this is a wake-up call for America, that if someone has a Hispanic last name, it doesn't mean that immigration is their number one issue, because for them, if they came here the right way, they want to punish people who came here the wrong way. And those who are voting
I totally agree.
are almost always those they came here the right way. So that was my number one surprise. And the number two surprise was that older women, in the end, they didn't vote with their generation, they voted by their gender. And that's how Harris did a little bit better than she might have in another election cycle.
You know, I was having a lot of conversations in the last few weeks with Americans in LA, in New York, and on the phone and stuff. And the reason I was so confident he was going to win and kept saying this, even as people were saying, no, there's no way. And I said, the reason is the number of people who were saying to me they hadn't voted for Trump before, but they were going to this time, but were doing it kind of like this with their mouth slightly hidden, even now with their hand, as if to say, I don't want people to hear this. I mean, literally, please don't tell anybody, but it was startling to me how many people were saying that. And I remember thinking, there were 2 or 3 friends of mine, I thought, wow, if you were doing it, if this is being replicated around America, then Trump could have a really big win. And I actually said on Fox, I think it was, last Saturday, I flew into New York and I went on Brian Kilmeade's show and I said, you know, I've just got a feeling he's going to win big. I had a feeling he'd win in 2016, but I think this could be a lot bigger. I'm just anecdotally picking up a feeling. And what's surprising to me, but maybe it's not surprising, is that pollsters whose only job it is to kind of read mood, I guess, is Trump slightly impervious to that way of collecting data? Is there just this thing about him where it's almost impossible to poll him accurately?
But it actually is possible. But what happens with a Trump supporter is that they're guaranteed to be a Trump voter. And that's the difference, that there are people who liked Harris but did not in the end come out and vote for them. The percentage of the vote that was women 18 to 29 was not above what it usually is. And that was needed for her to get over the finish line. I believe it came in at roughly 7%. It needed to be 10%. It needed to be closer to the national average, which of that segment of how much they deserve to be based on their population. And she didn't pull them out. In the end, they didn't vote. But I believe in the end that it's not just about Trump, that it is about Harris. She should have had Taylor Swift doing concerts in Philadelphia, in Detroit, and in Madison, one after another after another. That could have resulted in 10,000 additional votes. That would not have been enough, but it would have excited that young vote. And the other thing about Harris is she never told people what she was going to do in the first hour, the first day, the first week, the first month, the first year. And the public was saying again and again and again, tell us. And what was the campaign doing? Calling Trump a fascist, saying that he's evil. All they did was try to redefine, not redefine, but enforce that Trump definition. Piers, we know about Donald Trump. We know who he is. We know how he talks. There's no surprise there. The surprise was that Harris did not understand and did not explain to the American people what she was about, and that's why she lost. In the end, another candidate could have done a better job than she did.
I completely agree, and I think the Democrats' biggest mistake was not to have an open convention with letting other people try and battle it out with her to get the nomination. I think they will regret that enormously because I don't think she would have won. And I think you're right. She couldn't articulate what she would do because I don't think she actually knew. And all she reverted to in the end, she went from joy and hope to Trump's a Nazi. And in the moment you do that, you're right back with Hillary Clinton back in 2016. You're demonizing him, demonizing his supporters, not really offering people a vision for positivity for the country, just it can't be him. And Trump has proven time and again that when you do that, he normally wins. Frank, great to talk to you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your honesty. The great thing about you is when you get it wrong, you say it. If only other people would be so honest. But I appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Piers.
Let me bring back the panel quickly before I go to Bill O'Reilly. Dan, a lot of honesty there from Frank Luntz about why the pollsters, including him, called this wrong. But I do feel with Trump that even though people are reluctant to sometimes to say that they're with him, that reluctance is receding fast. I've really noticed in New York in the last week that I've been here, people very openly saying, I'm going to vote Trump. As well as friends of mine doing it behind a hand, people just saying, no, it's no longer become a badge of dishonor. And I mean, he didn't win New York, but he certainly reduced Kamala Harris's victory in New York to a record modern low for a Democrat candidate. So do you feel like, as Frank was saying, that Trumpism and the way he is kind of baked into people now? They kind of got used to it. I was struck by the Madison Square Garden rally that only 150 protesters turned up. I'm struck that this morning in New York, there are no mass protests. It's just not there anymore. So they can all call him Hitler as much as they like, but they're not turning out to stop him, and they're not raging when he's won. It's
baked in, but I think there's more to it than that. I think he's grown. I mean, I think he's changed over time. You're not seeing a daily tweet from Trump that just riles everybody up. It's just not happening anymore. I think he ran a much more disciplined campaign this time that didn't give the other side the kind of ammunition it was used to having. So there's that, which is pretty good. And also, I think people have the benefit of hindsight at this point. And I've pointed this out a million times as I was campaigning for Trump. This is a unique election where you have 4 years from one candidate and you have 4 years from the other candidate. And you have very specific policies from each candidate, and you have very specific outcomes that are associated with those policies, including things, by the way, like cutting the corporate tax rate and having a pro-growth economy, which, by the way, helped lowest quintile earners the most. Hate to break it to you, but if you're a real populist working for the working man, then you might want to actually do things that work for the working man.
It helps your donors and billionaires the most.
It's true.
Okay, let me bring in. Let me bring in Cenk. Cenk, all I want to ask you, Cenk, is.
But anyway, that's what helped. I think people were able to look objectively at the policies and take a breath and say, you know what, those 4 years weren't bad. In fact, they were pretty good.
Yeah, Cenk, all I want to ask you is, what do the Democrats do now? Who is the person out there that can basically start again for the Democrats and potentially win in the next election in 4 years? Because that's all the Democrats have left now, is to plan for what happens next.
Yeah, so two things. First off, most important part is the message to Democratic voters. The clip that you played from the Young Turks coverage last night, I was saying, Democratic voters, the definition of insanity is doing something over and over again and expecting a different result. Stop believing the Democratic establishment. Stop believing that there's some sort of geniuses and they're playing four-dimensional chess and eventually they're going to win. They're not. They lost to Trump twice. They know absolutely nothing. All they know is how to take donor money. They bragged so much about raising $1 billion. What good did it do you? You're supposed to get the actual votes. So what we need to do in order to have any chance of winning is we've got to go in a populist direction where we represent the average man in America. Stop representing corporate CEOs and your donor class. And the way to do that is to do a populist revolt. You must win in the Democratic primaries. Those Democratic primaries for 2028 are going to decide whether the Democratic Party is going to be able to take on the Republicans effectively or if they're going to crash and burn. If they go with another corporate robot like Pete Buttigieg or someone along those lines, they're going to get annihilated. Stop doing things the same exact way when it gives you terrible results. On TYT.com, we have a pledge for a populist revolt where we demand things like anti-war position, money out of politics, renegotiate the prices on all drugs, prevent private equity from buying residential real estate and driving up our housing prices. These are all intensely popular proposals, but we never get there because they go, oh, civility. You know, Frank just mentioned that. And by the way, there's 3 people that said all along, we have no idea who's going to win this race. Me, Frank Luntz, and Nate Silver. And we were right because both sides were overconfident, but especially the Democrats were overconfident, obviously, right? And they kept thinking, oh, no, if enough corporate CEOs and enough Cheney support us, we'll win. Well, you were fundamentally wrong about that. If you don't turn around, people like Trump are going to win forever. We've got to go towards populism and regain it. And Frank said, oh, it turns out civility is dead. Yeah, you know why? Because civility is a code word that mainstream media and the Democratic and Republican establishments use to protect the status quo. Hey, nobody get excited. Don't get excited. We're just doing corporate tax cuts here. And now Dan, as exactly as I predicted in the middle of the show, is saying there should be no corporate taxes because the rich are going to rob this place.
Because I study economics, Cenk. Because I study economics and I know things about economics.
The one thing, Cenk, hang on, I don't want to get back into that. We haven't got time, guys. The one thing I'll say, Cenk, is no one would ever accuse you, Cenk, no one would ever accuse you of leading the charge for more civility in public discourse. But I do appreciate you coming on to face the music today. Just very, very quickly to Crystal and to Vincent. Crystal, I mean, just to that one point, we haven't got much time because I've got Bill O'Reilly ready. I want to get his take on this. But just who would you like to see lead the Democrats out of the ashes here?
Sean Fain, president of the UAW, someone of that ilk, populist left. Do I think that's going to happen? No. I think they'll learn all the wrong lessons. I think they'll probably pivot to the right. They're already embracing the sort of like scapegoat immigrants and poor people vision of the right. And I think they just continue to go in that direction and probably continue to lose.
Okay, Vinny, who would you most fear on the Democrat side if they were to suddenly lead the Democrats?
2 things. Number one, Gavin Newsom, that slithering snake in the grass, complete establishment. That is the fear. You want to talk about populists and just that's my biggest fear. And guess what? That type of guy could win. That kind of guy could win. But and just really fast, Pierce, I know we have to leave. I just want everybody to know when me and Cenk talk about the establishment, I hope everybody realizes yes, we won and yes, we're happy, but don't sleep for 2 seconds that the Schumers, the Pelosi's and everybody, and the Jamie Raskin, who have said this fight isn't over, Pierce, that he's gonna, it's on internet that he said they're gonna go after the 14th Amendment, Article 3 to get Trump out. He said it, and he even warned of a civil war, which I'm tired of hearing. We don't need to. Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Right.
You can clip it.
Do you know what I'd like to see? Listen, well, you know what I'd like to see? I would like to see one of the first things Trump does is to pardon Hunter Biden and all the Bidens from any future litigation, to say that's it. That would be an act of unity, which I think would go a long way to calming everybody down. I hope he does that. We will see. Thank you to my panel. Much appreciated. Cenk, appreciate you coming on and facing the music. Can't be an easy morning to be Cenk Uygur.
It's always a good day to be Cenk Uygur.
Especially if it's wrong about so many things.
Well, I'm joined now by the journalist and host of No Spin News, Bill O'Reilly. Bill, what an incredible night. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that the American people voted their pocketbooks, and working class Americans are suffering. and that Joe Biden really lost the election. Kamala Harris was not a good nominee or a campaigner, but Biden lost it. Disastrous president. And ironically, for those who don't watch The View in Great Britain or around the world that are watching tonight, ABC News is a program every day called The View. And there are 5 ladies on the program, all of whom are leftists, and they hate Trump. And they invited Kamala Harris on, and that was one of the few venues she agreed to enter. And in the process of telling the vice president how terrific she was, one of the ladies asked her a very simple question. Is there anything that the Biden administration has done that you would have not done? And she goes, I can't think of anything. That was the end. That lost the election for Kamala Harris. When Americans are paying 20% more for the essentials of life, and that includes insurance, food, fuel, clothing, on and on. And when we are embarrassed in front of the world in Afghanistan, and you can't think of one thing that you would have done differently than President Biden, you can't come back from that. And that's where she lost the election.
Bill, you're a scholar of all things president in American history. Where does this rank as a comeback? I mean, I can't think of a greater comeback in American political history than what's happened here with Trump. But can you?
Yeah, Andrew Jackson. Did you read Confronting the Presidents, Piers? I think we sent you a free book. Did you read it,
yes,
or did you sell it on eBay? Okay.
I did. No, of course.
So, there's been some comebacks. I mean, Richard Nixon, obviously vilified within an inch of his life, wins in 68 and 72. Andrew Jackson lost to Quincy Adams in a corrupt bargain and came back and then waxed Quincy Adams the next 4 years. But what's very interesting in Confronting the Presidents is our pal Grover Cleveland, whose nephews and nieces called him Uncle Jumbo. 350 pounds. He was the only American president elected to non-consecutive terms, now joined by Donald Trump. And Cleveland's second term, that began in 1892, was a disaster. And I wrote in my message of the day on BillO'Reilly.com, Donald Trump needs to read that chapter in Confronting the Presidents and not make the mistakes that Cleveland made. Because your second term is harder than your first term. It always is. And in America, the expectations for Donald Trump, particularly in the economic range, are enormous. And he has really got a lot of work to do.
Can I'm just going to challenge that pretext you just came up with by saying Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan, who I believe, and you'll know better than me, but they inherited not great economies, but had a better economy for their second terms and were able to have more successful second terms than first. Would that be accurate? And could Trump have the same, where the economy may be getting in better globally and that he might be able to use that? It might suit his natural instincts on the economy and may end up giving him a great second term. Is that possible?
Yeah, I don't like to be speculative, but certainly the history is right. You have it right. So Bill Clinton comes off Bush the elder, where the economy, just like his son, Bush the younger, in the last year of their terms, collapses. And Bill Clinton was a very efficient president, very efficient. And he comes in, he analyzes where the U.S. economy has to go to grow and pulls it off. And he's reelected despite Lewinsky and all the other stuff, because Americans essentially want, here's what, and people in England, I just got back from England. I was just there at Tottenham Stadium watching the Jets play the Vikings. And I had lived in England for a year as a student at the University of London. What British people don't understand about Americans is that we're not ideological, most of us. We're not like the panel you just heard on Pierce's program. Most Americans just want opportunity. That's why millions of people are trying to get in here. They don't want a big government telling them what to do. And when the opportunity shrinks, who's ever in charge, like Jimmy Carter from 76 to 80 is out. And Reagan was put in there, and it took Reagan 3 years. Now, he was shot and almost killed, so that it was a mitigating factor. It took Reagan almost 3 years to get out of the mess that Jimmy Carter got the country into, because Carter didn't understand macroeconomics. And Carter and Biden were very, very similar. Although Biden was so mentally diminished in the last 2 years in office, he didn't make any decisions, zero decisions. The cabal around him told him what to do, and he did it. You know, running this country, because the most powerful country on earth by far, is a very complicated matter. And I know Donald Trump for 35 years. I know him better than anybody, I think, except his immediate family. And Trump is a deal maker. He's not a politician per se. He's not an ideologue. He makes deals. And in his first 4 years, the deals he made were good. And real wages went up more than 7%. And that is the truth. And every working American benefited from that. So then 4 years later, despite all of the controversy that Trump had, that was in their minds. Under Trump, it was better for me and my family. And that's why he won.
What's your advice to Donald Trump? I spoke to him this morning. He was tired. I mean, it must be utterly exhausting, and he's nearly 80. He was tired, but he was really euphoric about what looks like a sort of historic scale of the victory, where he may have a clean sweep of literally everything. But what advice would you give someone who's got that kind of mandate from the American people, and who's managed to bring in now Black Americans, Latinos, and Arabs, and so on, as he referenced in his speech last night? What advice do you give him to hit the ground running and to try and unify what is a very fractured United States of America?
All Americans are pretty much the same in the marketplace, despite what you hear. And that's why certain groups that usually vote Democrat went over to the Republican side, because they know their opportunity is much less now than it was 4 years ago. Now, if you give Donald Trump advice, the odds are he will do the exact opposite. So I have to, when he calls me, I have to tell him what I don't want to happen. So he might do what I do want to happen. But I'm not an advice giver. Now, once in a while, the president will call me, sometimes at 2 in the morning, and he'll ask me a question. I'll answer him honestly, just as I answered Barack Obama's questions and Bush the Younger's questions. That's my job as a loyal American. I would say to Donald Trump that on the first day in office, you sign an executive order knocking out all of the regulations that Biden put on the fossil fuel industry. Immediately, that will lead to a price drop of fuel in America, which has to translate into all the other areas except insurance. Trump's going to have to deal with the insurance companies because they're gouging now. People can't even afford to drive a car anymore here. It's insane. But that's number one. And number two is he's going to have to stop all visas for at least 3 months of foreign nationals coming here saying they want asylum. No asylum claims for 3 months until you reorganize this whole thing at the southern border. If he does those 2 executive orders, he'll get at least 6 months of a honeymoon, and his enemies are melting down now. I mean, there are people in the streets it's like the Night of the Living Dead in California. They're just walking around going, brains. And they're just so stunned because the mainstream media was telling them that Kamala Harris was going to win. I knew she wasn't. I predicted she wasn't because I know the folks. That separates me from the New York Times, Washington Post, and all the networks. I know the folks.
What should the Democrats do, Bill? I mean, they've obviously dug themselves into a terrible hole here. I liked Trump's line last night about him representing the core of common sense. And it seems to me what the Democrats have done, they've gone so far progressive left with this woke mindset, the woke virus, as Elon Musk calls it, that they've lost all track of common sense. And one of the main examples I constantly give is this issue of trans athletes in women's sport, where, you know, even the United Nations last week said that 900 medals had been deprived from women athletes around the world in competition by trans athletes. Clearly, that is wrong, unfair, unequal, and the opposite of what the Democrats claim to want for women. So it seems to me they lost their common sense marbles. How do they get those back, and who do they do it with? Who is the person out there, do you think, in the Democrat political landscape who could bring them back to a more centrist, electable mindset?
Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania will be a very strong contender for the presidential nomination on the Democratic side 4 years from now. Probably get it. Newsom is far too left. Kamala Harris was the furthest left presidential candidate in the history of the United States by far. By far. No one had ever approached her. And the reason that happened was because of the money. George Soros money, I call it dark money, from the progressive left that wants to take over the U.S. government. And if you want to know what they want, you listen to Bernie Sanders, the senator from Vermont who was just reelected last night. The progressive movement wants a strong central government to run pretty much everything. And they want woke policies like, if you want a transition, then O'Reilly's tax dollars will pay for that. If you want an abortion 2 weeks before birth, that's not a problem, and O'Reilly's tax dollars will pay for that. It's so far out there against American tradition that the Democratic Party has destroyed itself. So they'll have to come back to a guy like Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, who, if Harris put him on the second, other than that bumbling guy Walz, who was a total ridiculous disaster for her, and why she didn't put him on the second, Shapiro, because that would have meant Pennsylvania would have gone over to Harris, was she's too insecure. She wants anybody smarter than her on the second. And the final thing I want to tell everybody is that Kamala Harris is a terrible candidate. You can't, in this country, avoid all questions. On Fox News, my alma mater, Bret Baier asked her 10 questions in the 22 minutes he had. She did not answer one of them.
No.
Even the dumbest American, even the dimmest person picked up on that. And they didn't trust her, and she lost.
Yeah. You know, I was told on Josh Shapiro that he turned her down. I don't know whether that's true, but I was told on good authority that it's not true?
No. He would have taken it.
Because I was going to say, if he was offered it and turned it down, that shows just how smart he is.
No, the Soros money didn't want him because of Israel and Gaza, because he's a Jewish American who supports Israel. And they didn't like him anyway because he wasn't a progressive nut like Walz is in Minnesota. And the progressives have the money. They have the Hollywood people. They have the organization, vicious, beyond vicious. All right? This country's never seen smear merchants like the progressive movement. I mean, it is just stunning how vitriolic and deceptive they are. But they're over now, at least in the short term. That whole movement is down the drain.
Yeah, it really is. And I actually thought that, talking of running mates, J.D. Vance turned out to be a pretty effective running mate for Donald Trump. I'm listening to his...
Yeah, unless he shaves his beard or screws up, he'll be the nominee on the Republican side in 28. It should be Vance versus Shapiro.
Yeah, be a good battle. Bill, great to talk to you, as always. Thank you very much. Well, joining me now is the host of The Michael Knowles Show, Michael Knowles, the host of Outkick and Gains for Girls podcast, Riley Gaines, and the former Republican congressman who campaigned for Kamala Harris, Joe Walsh. Welcome to all of you. Joe, what a complete and utter unmitigated disaster for you.
Here's a thumping. And I was wrong. I didn't think this would happen. I thought either candidate could win. I thought she'd win by more than people thought, and I was wrong. It was an utter spanking. Trump won over and over. I think this needs to be said at the beginning because this is really important. My candidate lost. Donald Trump won. I congratulate Donald Trump, and I wish him the best. I accept the results Kamala Harris will come out today and publicly accept the results, publicly concede, and publicly congratulate Donald Trump. We need to get back to that in this country and get away from what we've been living in these past 4 years with a former president who never did that. I lost. I wish him the best.
Very magnanimous of you. Michael, little choice, is there, for the Democrats? I mean, this is a drubbing of historic proportions and quite extraordinary when you see that Trump won with women. He massively increased his vote with black men, Latinos he won. I mean, this is after the Puerto Rico garbage joke at the Madison Square Garden everyone assumed would destroy his Latino vote and so on. None of the predictions happened. You know, I was out there for weeks saying Trump's going to win and I think he's going to win big. And people would openly laugh at me and say, don't you get it? It's over. He's been a loser ever since 2016. And I was like, actually, you guys don't get it. Why don't you just go around and talk to people? Because the number of people I was talking to saying, I don't really like Donald Trump, but I'm going to vote for him. I've never voted for Trump, but you know what? On the economy and immigration, I just feel he's going to do a better job than Kamala, and so on. The number of people was striking to me, and I'm just really struck by the fact that pollsters, whose only job it is to predict this stuff from number crunching, none of them really saw this coming, this kind of devastatingly big victory.
Yes, only people with common sense saw this coming, as you point out, Piers. It was a complete tsunami, just a total electoral bloodbath, which is why it's such a scandal that Kamala Harris would not concede last night when there was absolutely no path to victory for her whatsoever. Trump was clearly going to win the popular vote by a lot, as well as the Electoral College by an obvious victory. So that was unfortunate. And it was sad that she wouldn't even come out and address her supporters. She proved that she's not capable of presidential leadership. She sent out her campaign flack, much as Hillary Clinton did in 2016, when she also refused to concede the election, even when it was clear that she had lost. So I totally agree with Joe. I think it's very important that we get back to accepting the results of elections that are transparent, that are conducted efficiently. I thought it was unfortunate when Al Gore and the Democrats did not concede the 2000 election. I thought it was unfortunate when Hillary didn't concede the 2016 election. I thought it was unfortunate when Stacey Abrams in Georgia didn't concede her election in the governor's race.
Michael,
and I thought it was really scandalous.
What about 2020, my friend?
Oh, well,
Michael?
Yes, no, that's a good point, Joe. No, yeah, I'm happy to address it. I think it's a good point. I think last night what you saw was a great vindication of how the American people react when elections are conducted efficiently and clearly and fairly and without changing all the rules in the weeks before the election and without violating the state constitution, as in the case of Pennsylvania in 2020. It was so clear. You had a really fair fight here, and Trump absolutely mopped the floor with Kamala Harris and the Democrats. And people came out not just to vote against Kamala Harris, who was a complete empty suit. No one knew what she believed about anything. She'd held both sides of every issue. They didn't even come out just to vote against the Biden administration. I think they were voting for common sense. They were clearly voting for Trump. Trump was a great president. Things were good when he was president. Things were a lot worse after Trump left office. And so people wanted to go back to the good times again. And it wasn't just one racial group and it wasn't just one sexual group. It was pretty much everybody supported Trump. And so this is a wonderful opportunity to unify the country and make America great again.
Yeah, I completely concur with that. The Democrats really can't say anything this morning. Riley, you've been very courageous in the last few years. And I've said this to you a number of times because you chose this issue of trans athletes basically wrecking the integrity of women's sport. And you've been vilified and shamed and threatened and all the rest of it for doing this, as has everyone who's put their head over that parapet. I've had it myself, J.K. Rowling, all these Martina Navratilova, lots of different people from different backgrounds have all had the same treatment. But I do think it's people like you who made Trump understand just how important this issue was to women, which is why he came out so unequivocally a week ago and said, I will ban all trans athletes from women's sport. That kind of thing matters. That goes to what he talked about with the core of common sense. So I salute you for your courage over a long period of time for doing this. But do you think the Democrats, I mean, it always struck me as totally perverse that the Democrats position themselves as the party for women's rights and push this abortion issue so strongly while simultaneously wanting to eradicate women's rights in things like sport and safe spaces and so on. The two were completely incompatible. So how are you feeling today?
Well, Piers, of course, thank you for having me on. To clarify, you said I chose this issue. To be very, very clear, I did not choose this issue.
Well, it chose you.
I wish desperately that this is not what we had to spend our time doing. Me personally, I wish this was not a campaign issue. I wish this did not require bravery and courage, like you said, because I don't feel brave. I don't feel like I've said anything overly profound or wise. I mean, I've literally just said that men and women are different. That's it, but it speaks to the moral decay and the decline of our great nation. And so to your point, yeah, to have an entire political party that claims to be of and for women, really prides themselves on it, yet, I mean, can't even define what a woman is, has allowed 16,000 known immigrants entering into this country illegally that are rapists. I mean, that's just not pro-woman. And of course, the issue of allowing men into women's sports. They say this is progress. They, do it under the guise of being progressive or even feminism, weirdly enough. But to be very clear, this is not progressive. This is deeply regressive. It's utterly misogynistic. And we've seen this turnaround. We saw just this morning, actually, on MSNBC, Morning Joe. He came out and said, look, I think the Democrats should have been smarter about this. 85% of American voters agree that it's wrong to put men in women's sports. Yeah. So it's almost like they lose and suddenly common sense is back.
Well, you know what? Sometimes it takes a thumping defeat to realize you've got to wake up and smell the coffee. Let's take a look at that clip you talked about on MSNBC.
Democrats should be smarter on the women's athletics thing. 85% of Americans oppose men transitioning after puberty and competing against women. And I'm not just saying this the day after the election. I've been saying this for years. This is not a hard call. And as the Republican governor of Utah said, let's figure out a way to do this. But one way we don't do this is by allowing men who transition after puberty competing against young girls who have been working their entire lives to be as good as they can be, and then they get destroyed in the pool, on the track, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Joe, sorry, Riley, sorry, you want to say something?
I was just going to say, I think this is pretty remarkable, not even in necessarily the content of what he's saying, but how he is saying it. Look, he called this very clearly what people like you and I know what this is. It's men who have transitioned to women. I mean, we wouldn't have seen this a year ago. They would have continued with the verbiage of trans woman or even calling these people women, these men women, but to come outright and say men who have transitioned. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a big step in the right direction.
Yeah, and Joe, what I would say, Joe, I'll come to your response, but what I would say is it's never been to me an issue of being transphobic. I've always campaigned, both on air and in print, for trans people to have the same rights to fairness and equality as everybody else, right to the point that they erode women's rights to fairness and equality. And this seems such a clear-cut issue. And I kept being told by my liberal friends, of which I'm one, I kept being told, you know what, you've got this so wrong. Americans don't care. It's not a big problem. And then you see the United Nations come out with a report last week that 900 medals have been deprived from women athletes around the world in competition because trans athletes have beaten them. So it is a big problem, and people do care. And intrinsically what they think is what Joe Scarborough just said, which is just, it's so obviously wrong.
Exactly, Piers. And I believe Joe Scarborough when he's been saying that for years. And Joe's not a Democrat, and I'm not a Democrat. I'm a former right-wing radio talk show host. I've been saying the same thing. On this issue of transgenders, the vast majority of Americans are right there in the tolerant, you can identify as you want to be, love and embrace our transgender fellow Americans. But when it comes to sports and locker rooms, there are common sense solutions, and men shouldn't be competing with women. Get all that. And the Democrats and the far left are bad on that. But Piers, this goes to a broader point. Look, I can't stand Donald Trump. I think he's a horrible human being who lies every time he opens his mouth. This election was about working class America. And Donald Trump for 8 years has demagogued and lied to working class America. But the Democratic Party, the elitist Democratic Party, has looked down on them over and over on this issue and a whole bunch of issues. And so most of working class America said, I'd rather be with that asshole than the folks who look down on me. this is a problem the Democratic Party has.
Yeah, I mean, Michael, I interviewed
that
Dennis
in
Quaid,
terms
the
of-
actor, who starred as Reagan in the movie about Reagan recently. And he said, you know, Trump may be an asshole, but he's my asshole. And I do think a lot of people this time round were like, yeah, you know what? I'm just kind of done with the whole debate about how he speaks and his rhetoric and all the rest of it. He's a trash-talking New York real estate guy. Everyone I've met who's a New York real estate guy talks like Trump. And actually, you're far better off setting aside the rhetoric and focusing on what he actually does. And so this whole construct that he's a fascist and a neo-Nazi, it just bears no relation to the reality of his actions when he was actually president.
It's amazing how many racial minorities and Jews and Muslims, for that matter, all voted for Hitler, right? Isn't that so crazy? Who would have guessed that? Of course, the fascist accusations or whatever, that's totally nuts. But I'd actually like to take it one step further. I'm a New Yorker by birth and upbringing. I am familiar with the way that New Yorkers talk, and I've been around it a lot of my life. However, I don't think that Trump is actually more vulgar than Democrats, for instance. You know, the pro-Harris campaign was running ads that were obscene about pornography, about all sorts of things this cycle. More obscene, more crass than anything really that we've heard from Donald Trump. When people say that Donald Trump, you know, he might have a shady character, but at least he gets results, I don't know that he's got such a shady character. I think he's demonstrated a lot of virtue in this campaign. I think he's obviously demonstrated courage under fire, and courage is the virtue that permits all of the other virtues. I think Trump has demonstrated an impressive degree of humility. When he told that person, that voter outside of McDonald's who said, "Sir, I support you, I'm just an ordinary voter," he said, "You're not ordinary. There's no such thing as an ordinary voter. You're really extraordinary because you're an individual." I think he meant that. That was sincere. I think that's who that guy is. When he picked up the Marine's cap and put it on his head as he was boarding a helicopter, I think that's who that guy is. And I think that's what resonated for people. You know, to Joe's point, yes, the voters believe that Democrats hold them in contempt and disdain and look down upon them. That's all true. But I think they didn't just vote against those Democrats. I don't think they just grudgingly voted against Trump. I think Trump has demonstrated an admirable character with many virtues that are in short supply these days. And I think people voted for Donald Trump. So it's going to be easy to blame Kamala because she's a deeply unpopular candidate who no one ever voted for in a primary when she was running. And it's going to be easy to blame all sorts of other people. I think Trump would have won against Biden. I think Trump would have won against pretty much any Democrat because things were good when Trump was president. He's an aspirational figure. He's speaking to an aspirational moment, and people who want to do, as his campaign says, make America great again.
Yeah, you know, Riley, I look back on the last few months, and I think there were three pivotal moments to me that I think won Trump the election. I think he would have won anyway, but I think the ones that absolutely cemented the scale of victory. When he got shot, and without even knowing if there were other shooters out there, he stood back up and said, "Fight, fight, fight." I think that was an iconic moment in modern American political history. I think when he got behind the serving station at McDonald's and was seen cooking fries and serving regular Americans. And I think when he jumped in the garbage truck after his people were called garbage. And I think what all those three things did, they showed, as Michael said, a strength of character and courage and resilience when he was actually shot, as he put it to me when I took a bullet for democracy, which is ironic given he's supposed to be the existential threat to democracy. And secondly, the regular guy stuff, which even though he's a multi-billionaire, he understood the power of the imagery of serving McDonald's fries and jumping in a garbage truck. In other words, they may want to demonize regular Americans, but actually I don't. You're people that I can relate to. And I think that worked. It might all have been stunts. It might have been PR, the McDonald's and garbage truck thing, but it was bloody good PR if it was. It worked.
Agreed. Not to mention the iconic mugshot. I mean, really, the list goes on, which I think is the part it's hard for people to understand. But in reality, with your everyday American person, it's difficult for people to identify with Kamala, which is, again, almost ironic, considering this is someone who initially came out first and said she worked at McDonald's. She grew up in a middle-class family compared to a New York billionaire who has an extraordinary ability to connect with people in a relatable way. Most people don't have the opportunity of spending one-on-one time with President Trump, but I do. And I can tell you it's remarkable in the way that he remembers details, things about me. He remembers my husband every time he sees me. You know, Riley, how's Louis' construction business going? I mean, it's incredible. And yeah, he's the king. He's the king of marketing and branding. I believe there should be case studies for years to come in business schools about Donald Trump. And one more point I want to add. You mentioned these kind of pivotal moments for Trump. I think a pivotal point for Trump over the past week was really Mark Cuban. And Mark Cuban coming out and saying, you know, Trump doesn't, he's just not seen around strong, intelligent women. I can tell you, as a woman, which this is, of course, historically a voting demographic that does not turn out for whoever the Republican nominee is. I mean, I believe that helped him tremendously. And so maybe we should send a thank you note on behalf of conservatives to Mark Cuban, because I think it was pivotal. We had people like Sage Still, Lara Trump, Danica Patrick on stages, getting out the women. We saw Megyn Kelly's speech. I mean, it was revitalizing for me. I think that's the type of strong female leadership that we as conservatives, especially conservative women, especially young conservative women, that's what we've been desperate to see.
Yeah, and you know the irony, Joe, is that in Kamala Harris, ironically, the Democrats did not have a strong woman, in my opinion. They didn't have any woman with the real strength of leadership to understand what it took to beat Trump. And that's going to be something you guys will regret for a long time.
Well, you guys, I'm not a Democrat. I was with her, but and I agree with Michael on this. Maybe now, I don't know that she ever could have beaten him. And I place more blame on Joe Biden for staying in office way too damn long. But Piers, it's not that he's a trash talker. I could give a damn that he's a trash talker. Come on, guys. He's a pathological liar. He takes a real issue like immigration, the problem of immigration, and he tells the American people Haitian migrants are eating cats and dogs. The guy lies as he breathes. I'll acknowledge, Piers, it's effective, and I'll acknowledge Democrats have ignored the issue of immigration, but Donald Trump lies about that issue and every single issue, and he tries to scare the crap out of people with this. There's nothing redeemable about that. That's despicable.
Joe, here's the problem with that narrative. I've heard this for months from people who hate Trump. The problem is the left have spent the last 8 years telling America that Trump is the new Adolf Hitler, a guy who murdered 12 million people, who led a Holocaust of 6 million Jews. And that's the biggest single, most insidious, disgusting, shameful lie of the whole damn shebang. So when the left try and take the high moral ground about lying, I say, what about you lot, who called Trump Hitler for 8 years? Who called people who went to his rallies neo-Nazis? All this stuff. To me, that was the worst lie of all. So practice what you preach.
No, and I agree with that. And look, I believe Trump's an existential threat to our democracy. I never called him Hitler. I would never do that. But Piers, just so for my own edification, you will acknowledge, won't you please, that Donald Trump does have a problem with the truth? Just please acknowledge that.
You know what I do? But I would counter it. Look, you know what I think about Trump? I think he's always been a world-class bullshitter. In other words, he's a massive embellisher. He'll self-aggrandizing stuff that suits him. Of course, he is all those things. We know that. But I also think the Democrats and Kamala Harris and Biden and others, they've been extremely disingenuous. And I'll give you one example, Joe. They often do and say things that they know they're taking deliberately out of context, the very thing they accuse Trump of. Take, for example, the repeated claim that he said there would be a bloodbath if he didn't win the election. You,
Agreed.
Riley, Michael, me, Kamala, Joe, everybody knows he was talking about in the auto industry. He wasn't talking about actual human blood. So when I hear people like you say the trouble with Trump is he lies all the time, I'm like, what about that stuff? That is just blatant lying.
Piers, you're right. He says enough bad things every day that you don't need to lie about him. He never called for the public execution of Liz Cheney. That was a lie. What he said about Liz Cheney was pretty despicable, but he never called for the execution. I acknowledge that. But he says 1,000 bad things every day. And you're right, the left overdoes it on a few, no doubt about it.
Well, let's agree. Why don't we agree?
Joe,
reach a point on the end. Unfortunately, I've got to leave it there. But let's all agree one thing. Why don't we all agree? It would be great to have a reset now, where everyone just stops lying. Everyone.
Good luck with that, Piers.
We have a fact-led, honest future for the United States of America. And my country, by the way. Great to have you all. Sorry, Joe, rough day to come on. I know that. I appreciate you coming. Riley, again, great courage. And Michael, you have the smile of a cat that got the cream this morning, and I don't blame you.
It's a fine day in the Republic, Piers. Thanks for having me on.
Well, America's best-known evangelist and son of Billy Graham, Reverend Franklin Graham, joins me now. Franklin, great to see you.
It's good to be with you, Piers, and I appreciate, Piers, your stand for the royal family of the UK. You took some hits for that, and I appreciate you doing that.
Well, thank you, Franklin. That's very good of you to say. I want to play a clip from Donald Trump's victory speech last night, because it's relevant, I think, to you. And he talked about God saving him. Let's take a listen.
And I said that many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country and to restore America to greatness. And now we are going to fulfill that mission together. We're going to fulfill that mission.
Franklin, what did you make of what Trump said there?
Well, no question, Piers. When he was there in Pennsylvania and that bullet went through his ear, just missing his brain by a millimeter or so, I believe God turned his head at that precise moment that saved his life. And so there's no other way to explain it. And then to have another assassin waiting for him on the golf course, and they were able to spoil that. I believe it's God, no question. I think God has saved him and brought him to this position. No American politician has been attacked the way he's been attacked. And I'm not talking about with assassin's bullets, but I'm talking about the media. You talk about election interference. It's not the Russians. It's ABC, NBC, CBS. It's New York Times. They've all colluded together to try to destroy this man. And one of your other guests was talking about all the lies that he tells. I disagree, Paris. I don't believe Donald Trump wakes up in the morning and says, I wonder how many lies I can tell to the American people today. He doesn't do that. He's not that kind of person. He would have never got to the position in the business world if he was just going out telling all these lies. You have to have some honor. You have to have integrity in the business world if you're going to survive. And I believe what happens is you hear things or you read things, and sometimes you take them out of context. Sometimes your staff gives you not all the information. And so you repeat it, and then it sounds like you've lied or whatever. And I just don't think that's the case with Donald Trump. Does he embellish? Of course he does. Like you said, he's a salesman. He's a New York realtor. But I don't think he wakes up in the morning to say how many lies I can tell. And I think God has protected him and saved him for a very special job. And that is to turn this nation, I think, turn it around. And also turn it back to God. When he won last night, that was a win for freedom, freedom of speech, for the American farmer, for the oil and gas industry. It's a win for the coal industry. It's a win for common sense. It's so many people. The unborn, I think about the millions of children that are going to be saved in the coming years because of Donald Trump. In his position. Now, he's not for a ban on abortion. He never has been, but he feels that decision should be made up by the states, and he's put it back in the hands of the state legislators to make those decisions. But there'll be millions of children who will survive because of Donald Trump. So I'm thankful, and I believe God put him there, Piers, and I couldn't be any more thrilled.
Well, he got 80% of the white evangelical Christian vote in the end, which was higher than many people feared may be the case. What in the end do you think drove the white evangelicals out to vote for him?
Listen, Piers, it's not the white evangelicals. It's black evangelicals, Latino evangelicals, the people that believe in God and worship God and read and study the scriptures and believe the Bible to be the Word of God. And it transcends whiteness. I mean, there's people of all races. And it's just, this is the group of people that stood behind him. And I just, and I thank God for that, but Trump resonated with them. and he defends them. And religious freedom is a big issue. And when you look at the left, and they're trying to take the freedoms that we enjoy, Trump defends us. Like Christmas in 2016, he brought back saying "Merry Christmas," and we think that's a little thing, but it's not a little thing. It's a big thing. It's the tip of an iceberg.
I agree. I mean, as a Christian, I remember that, and I remember thinking, "Good on you." And it comes back to what he said in his speech about that he thinks he's been able to bring people together in this expanded coalition of people from all creeds, all colours, and so on, because they are aligned by a core of common sense. And I agree with him.
Yeah. And Piers, here's another thing. I believe with his presidency, he will find a way to negotiate the end to the war in Europe. There has been no diplomatic pressure. There hasn't been someone going to Moscow and someone going to Kyiv and then back to Moscow and back to Kyiv, not a Henry Kissinger type person, to try to find how we can resolve this war. We just send more rockets. We just send more bullets. And there's, the Russians, what do? They up the ante by, trying to do damage to us. We need to be negotiating this and not escalating the war, but negotiating an end to this. And I hope Donald Trump will put somebody in there right away. I hope he doesn't wait till he's sworn in, but he can begin to lay the groundwork right now and bring this war to an end, which is it's escalating every day with North Koreans getting involved. With it's mind-boggling that our politicians have allowed this to go this long, this far.
Frankly, the opportunity Trump has to try and unify the country has never been better than it is right now because of the scale of his win. America's very divided, fueled a lot by toxic social media. What should he be saying to the American people to try and calm things down and bring people back together?
Well, I think no question he can bring the people of America together. That's not the issue, but it's the left that have gone after him so viciously for the last 4 years, dragging him in and out of court, changing the rules. And it is just that they need to be held accountable, Piers. You can't continue to do this, and I hope there is an investigation into some of these things and clear Trump's name. It should not have happened. It is wrong. They've weaponized the FBI and the justice system. It just shouldn't have taken place, and there needs to be an accountability here.
I mean, I don't disagree with that, but at the same time, you also want to try and bring America back together. What's his best way of dealing with the obvious divisions, do you think?
I think you bring America together by making America prosperous for everybody. With the economy, bringing back fuel prices and bringing them back down to where people can afford, the farmers, all the regulation that has come onto farming, onto manufacturing, especially the oil and gas industry. These regulations need to be rolled back to 2016 times. It's what the Democrats have done to make it so difficult for people to survive in business, just like in New York, what they went after Trump. So many business people right now don't want to invest one penny in New York, scared to death of what could happen. So I think if you want to make America great again, that will bring people together if we all prosper, move forward.
Reverend Franklin Graham, great to have you back on Uncensored. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Piers.